So here's how I run my healer. First start off, I am a Breton. I use the Thief Mundus. I typically use max Magicka and max health food. I put all my points into Magicka. On this bar I'm just over 38k. Magicka, 19k health. My recovery is 1,686. Some people prefer to run it a lot higher. I feel I don't need to. I get my magic back also from my heavy attacks, and I make sure I place accordingly in my CP. This bar, 36.5, 19k again. Pretty much the same recovery. My crit is at 40. If I run a different staff, which I often do, it's at 50. And with a spell power pop potion, which increases my damage, my recovery, and my critical. This is what I'm sitting at on that bar, and my resto bar. So I'm almost at 2k there. Okay, I'll start with my gear. I do use a master resto, and I make sure I use healing springs, otherwise this is kind of pointless. I like to use infused. It increases the effect. And this is just my destro. You can run anything if you have the master resto. If not, I had a whole different setup. I would use either worm or spell power cure weapons instead. I use powered on this, and sometimes I will switch over to a precise. I always run a crusher enchant just to help the uptime. Maybe it's not needed, but in those situations, if I'm hitting an ad even, it'll help burn things down a little faster. I switch between 3 sets. I always have spell power cure on. I'll switch between mending or worm. It just depends on, if I'm running with another healer or what I'm doing. I typically have worm on. This is still on from last night. And I use 2 pieces infused at least. And on this setup, I have my my chest and my legs infused, as well as my feet. And on the 2 big pieces, I do use a health enchant, simply to get my health higher. In other situations, especially normal or regular vet dungeons, you might not need higher health, so you can put a Magicka enchant, or just depending on, what you're doing, how you want to set it up. Me, I like to sit a lot higher, especially for vet trials. Nobody wants a dead healer. And I have at least one of everything, so I can switch out whatever I need to do. I have a piece of mending, worm, and spell power for pretty much everything. So my skills, they're pretty much the same as most healers. Of course, combat prayer, healing springs, which is buffed up by my staff. I use harness Magicka, channeled focus for the increased spell and physical resistance, Magicka recovery. I use my healing ritual. This I always try and keep down. That way if somebody is at full health, spell power cure, this would proc it. Not to mention many other things. I have 3 ultimates that I like to rotate between depending on what I'm doing. I typically, like for example for vet trials, I'll keep this on my resto bar, and it's reviving barrier. It heals more on my resto bar, and thanks to my champion points, it absorbs a very good amount of damage for those clutch moments, but I usually do not use it unless, again, a clutch moment. I always am in a Warhorn rotation, which for this setup, I will have it on my destro bar. If I'm doing a dungeon, I usually will put my Warhorn on my resto bar and run the Solar Prison on my destro bar because it does more damage on my destruction bar. I have my Breath of Life on my destruction bar. And I do this because I don't use it that much. I'm not a Breath of Life spammer. I believe in heal over time. I only use it when I need it, so it doesn't need to be as strong. And then I also have Ellie Drain, Shards, and Purifying Light. I'll have this usually. If not, then I will put on Blockade to set things off balance if nobody else is. And Energy Orbs, this is what I use for vet trials, or just normal trials even. I do not run Radiant Oppression in vet or normal trials at all. I use that in dungeons, definitely though. It's overkill with too much heals. Rather have the extra damage. It does a lot of damage. And important, all the Templar passives, of course I have them. Of course I have Destro and Resto passives, and a couple other passives I'll point out here in a second. But the reason why I want to run Purifying Light, I try and go into battle and pop that up, and it helps spell damage for all the magical users. And the other passives that I find important, of course, light armor. I'm wearing all light armor. If you don't have the Master Resto and you can afford to have one piece of a monster set, if you're running, you know, Spell Power Worm, whatever on your weapons, then I used to use heavy, one piece heavy, and I would use a recovery, a max magica, or a spell crit, depending on what I was doing. So I do have some passives there. Mages Guild passives. Fighters Guild, this is what I have. The Banish the Wicked. Undaunted, I do have all those passives. Even though I'm just wearing light armor, it does help. And I have a couple of the assault passives. I was PvPing back in June and I just haven't, you know, respect to have extra points right now. But I do need to go get a couple sky shards to get this going, just to get my recovery up just a little bit more. It doesn't make too much of a difference. Again, I'm Breton, and I also have my provisioning. Again, I'm being lazy. Need to reset my points to put a little more points here. That's it. Or I could go get sky shards. Either way, I'm lazy. So, my CP, Blue Tree, I have 32 Elemental Expert, Elfborn, and Blessed. It's usually at 75. I'm just testing something I saw somebody say about having, if I were to have 14 exact percent, that it's actually not 14%, it's 13.99999. So I'm just seeing if it works. I don't know yet. It might not even make much of a difference. Anyway, I believe in CP passives as well. Passives are very important no matter what. And I use Staff Expert. This increases the damage done with light and heavy attacks for my destruction and restoration staffs. And a heavy attack for not only to get my Magica back, but you heal your allies for a percentage of the damage done with a fully done heavy attack with your Resto bar. That's a passive from the Resto staff line. This is why I have that. The more powerful my light or heavy attack is, the more I'm going to heal with it. I find that to be a nice little thing. Anyway, direct damage, I don't really have any. I just had 2 extra points. I got nothing over here. And my red tree is going to be a little different than how I normally do, simply because I was doing that AA last night, so I changed it to help myself. Ironclad, it reduces the damage taken for direct damage attacks. Spell shield, whatever. Hardy is what I usually have more, and these two are usually an even number. I think I usually do 49, I'm not sure. Anyway, I did this last night. And always pay attention to these skills if they apply. Like, there you go. You restore Magica. This, your healers shouldn't be rezzing anybody, but again, in dungeon situations, I do. I'm guilty, I don't care. Bastion, this, I love Bastion. It helps my harness magicka, and it also my reviving barrier. The less points I put into this, those two skills are not nearly as strong. My green tree, tenacity, restores more, arcanist. I never go 100 in anything. It's not worth it. You can use those extra CP to put somewhere else. Of course, if you're not max CP, you can, you know, I would say adjust by importance. You know, you can always test things because people's playstyles definitely matter. My health recovery, this is pretty much useless. I don't know. And tumbling, on all my characters, I use tumbling because I am a roll dodger and a blocker. And this, again, it actually, I should have had this higher regarding last night. So, usually, when I go up into a fight, the first thing I do is combat prayer. I run in, drop this. I will look at people in my house. Healing springs. I'll throw a couple of these. They're never in a row. I try to keep a shard on the tank. Throw this up. Ellie Drain, I'll do this before I do anything. This has no aggro, so that's actually usually the first thing I do. I'll do this, that, combat, step back, stay in my rune. This improves my spell and physical resist. As you can see, I'm at 23k, and that's whenever the buffs are fully up. Otherwise, it drops down a lot lower. The rest, a healer doesn't have a true rotation in my opinion. Of course, you need to keep things timed. That is important. But a true rotation, you don't need to always keep it up, because if one of your DPS doesn't have its rotation out, they need a shard. You have to stop what you're doing, throw it out there. I always try and keep these synergies in there. They have a cooldown. If you're running in 12-man, they can go ahead and pop the shit when they need it. Anyway, like I said, spell power pots, dual stat. This is how I like to run my healer. Not everybody does. It's my personal preference. It works for me. There might be stuff that works better, and I'll learn and grow and figure that out. I don't mind being proved wrong. I like to learn. I'm not closed-minded. The last thing I would say is just read passives. Keep things timed. Keep an eye. As a healer, you need to watch the entire screen. That's the most important thing, and it was the hardest for me to learn as a healer. Anyway, enjoy.